Social media is their reality.
Yeah, if I'm feeling down, then I'll look on those things and they'll just make it worse.
They have designed their algorithms and their networks exactly to cater to human pathology in its most extreme forms.
I originally set out to make a documentary that explored the possible positive benefits of diminished or controlled social media use. What I actually uncovered was something far, far darker. Obviously, there's new research, new developments all the time. So we're going to be talking about some of the elements of social media toxicity tonight. I think we're going to start from a place of trying to offer some solutions, though, right?
Yeah, maybe a bit before that, with all your permissions, maybe a bit before that, let's talk about the most recent studies, because some of them are really counterintuitive. And so let's start with the fact. France, as a country, prohibited the use of any kind of device, smartphones, tablets, in schools. The reason the French government gave is that they have established beyond any doubt that the usage, access to social media and the usage of such devices is, I'm quoting, harmful to anyone under the age of 18. So in France, such devices are banned in all academic institutions for students under the age of 18, which is the first country. It's the first country which did this. There's been a slew of studies since 2017, some of them obscure, some of them not so, and I will try to give a very brief overview of a few of them. As early as 2017, there was a study in an obscure country called the United Kingdom, where they asked British school children, would you have been happier had social media not been invented? And 63%, a whopping 63% of school children said, yes, we would have been considerably happier. That's a 2017 study. Then a research firm by the name of Ampere Analysis conducted a series of studies, not one, about social media, and I think this is possibly the biggest body of research and studies about the various impacts and dimensions of social media. But a few pertinent points. Among the age group 18 to 24, the level of satisfaction with social media and the level of importance of social media to in the user's life. So the questions were, how important is social media in your life? And how satisfied you are with social media. So the level of satisfaction, both dropped from 66% to 57% in less than 2 years. So the first study was conducted in 2016. The second study was conducted in 2018. And there's been a drop of essentially something like 20% from 66 to 57. Totally surprisingly, there's been a similar increase in satisfaction and importance among the age group 45 to 65, also known as the late dinosaurs. So these people found social media much more appealing than they have only 2 years before. The increase was from 23% to 28%. It seems that social media usage, the importance or the pivotal importance of social media in the user's life, and satisfaction with social media, are actually increasing dramatically among middle-aged and old people. There's a very interesting new trend. While teenagers are getting seriously disenchanted. And when I say seriously disenchanted, I will back this claim up by citing additional studies. So the marketing agency Hill Holliday conducted again a series of studies and discovered that 50% of all teenagers, and by the way, technically as of 2010 in psychology, teenage years are defined 15 to 25. So in this age group, 50%, that's 50%, have quit social media permanently, at least one platform of social media. So 50% of them have quit Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something permanently. But that's an enormous number. Must realize that still overall, Generation Z, which is the digital natives, the one born after 1995, constitute the majority of social media usage and social media users. If disenchantment among them reaches the level of 50%, that bodes very ill for the future of social media. Among Generation Z, 44% considered social media an utter waste of time. 41% said that after each time they access social media, they experience enhanced emotions of sadness, depression, and anxiety. That's 41%. A caveat here, these kids are not qualified to diagnose anxiety, depression, and sadness, or maybe sadness, but definitely not anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression are chimeral. They wear many guises. Very often you don't realize that it's depression or anxiety. The numbers are probably much higher. In studies conducted by Twenge, for example, of similar age group, but in the United States, the rate of anxiety quintupled among this age group in 5 years alone, between 2010 2015. So I think 41% is an understatement. It's self-reporting. Dr. Amanda Lenhart conducted a series of studies among US teenagers in the United States, and she discovered that 58% of teenagers in the United States broke up, so to speak, with social media at least once in the preceding year. Now that's very interesting because this is proof of addiction. I mean, if you break up and then you can't help it, you go back, and then you break up and you can't help it, you go back. That's proof of conditioning, actually. It's more than addiction. It's conditioning. So if we needed any proof of conditioning, it's the fact that 58% of teenagers desperately try to break up with social media, but fail. Keep coming back. These 58% in Dr. Amanda Lenhart's studies, all of them returned to social media. They broke up, but came back.
They couldn't help themselves.
They couldn't help themselves. Finally, in the United Kingdom, among Facebook users, 18 to 24, I think it's also Hill Holliday, but I'm not sure. Among users aged 18 to 24, 1.8% committed themselves to closing their Facebook accounts in 2019. That's, again, it's the first time since the inception of Facebook that the growth rate is negative among this age group.
Yeah.
What can we learn from these studies? We can learn from these studies that the natural constituency of social media, which is Generation Z, is utterly disillusioned, disappointed. They understand, even at their tender age, they understand that social media is essentially toxic. They want to break free, and they fail, which is proof positive that we are discussing, we're talking about conditioning or addiction. What can we do about it? Should I ask the question? Should you ask? What can we do about it? So I think I personally would suggest several steps. First of all, I think all social media should come with usage meters. When you sign on to a broadband service, when you use your iPhone, almost all electronic services and electronic devices provide you with clear feedback as to the amount of usage. This is not the case with social media, not the case with the majority of social media, to be precise. The Instagram does. But majority of social media don't do that. And they don't do that for good reason, because you would be terrified. In studies conducted in the United States, people spent an amazing 4.5 hours a day on social media. 4.5 hours a day, which was 4 times the amount of time they spent with their children and family. It was also twice the amount of time they spent on television, and infinitely more, I don't know how much, the amount of time they've read books. So social media is taking over. Social media is becoming the preferred screen. Social media needs to provide usage meters. When I say needs to provide, let's be honest about it. Social media has to be forced to do that. They will never do that of their own accord. They have to be subjected to legislation, regulation. There has to be a regulatory agency, and this regulatory agency has to penalize severely social media companies which do not abide by new guidelines.
So to be absolutely clear, you're not suggesting that the total solution would be that the social media platforms regulate themselves?
No. Self-regulation failed utterly. Listen, self-regulation utterly failed with the Russian interference in the elections, which is considered to be a much more serious business than the mental health of teenagers. After all, only 100,000 teenagers committed suicide in the last 5 years, which is fewer than the number of adults who died in car accidents. So it's nothing. But even when we deal with the question of Russian collusion, Russian interference in the elections, much more serious issues, fake news, still, self-regulation by the industry failed miserably. Generally, self-regulation fails. It failed in Wall Street. It failed, ultimately you have to step in as a regulatory agency mandated by legislation, by vox populi, by the voice of the people. And the people are speaking. I've just cited a series of studies which show that the main body of users of Facebook actually, in my view, beg for help. It's a cry for help. They are trying to break. We are not talking about 5.8%, we're talking about 58%. The majority of them are trying to break free. They are imprisoned, they're hostages, So the first thing is usage meters. I think when such feedback is provided, people would be so shocked by the numbers that it might influence behavior. That's number one. Number two, all social media must be equipped with self-limiting clocks. That means if you reach a level of usage, a certain level of usage per day, your access will be blocked. Simple, blocked. That's it. No way around it, unless you are a hacker and use sophisticated VPN and spoof your IP or whatever. If you're a regular user, your access will be blocked. Now you can say this is against free speech, this is not okay, but actually there are similar laws about alcohol usage. There are similar laws about other forms of behavior, other practices. There's no reason not to introduce this. So I think self-limiting clocks are important. The third thing is we should consider a minimum age for social media. I don't know what this minimum age should be. In the United States, in most states, no one under the age of 18 can drink alcohol. No one under the age of 18 can vote. No one under the age of 16 can drive a car. These are good numbers. These are good numbers. I would strongly recommend a minimum age for social media.
I think they have it set as 13 for Facebook and Instagram, but they're not enforcing it. It's so easy to go around.
First of all, it's very easy to go around, and it's in many other platforms which are not social media. For example, you must provide a copy of a government ID or something that, like driving license, passport, and so on. This is nonsense. They ask you, are you above the age of 13? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead. When I say minimum age requirements, Of course, authenticated and verified and so on and so forth. Not the nonsense of, are you above the age of 30? Even I'm above the age of 30. I know it's hard to believe, but so minimum age requirements, because we have a plethora, we have an abundance, a critical mass of studies that show that resilience to conditioning and addiction, addictive behaviors and so on, increases with age. And that above a certain age, which usually is 21 to 25, 26, depending on the country, the chances of developing a new addiction are very low. And the chances for conditioning are almost nil. Above age 25 or 26, they're almost nil, which is precisely why in psychology we redefine teenage years. And we put the upper boundary at 25. So that's the third recommendation I would make. I have a few more interesting recommendations. Some of them I think would be heard here for the first time. But I think if they're all implemented together, I think it would detoxify the platforms. Let's proceed, therefore. I would institute a mandatory real-life correlate. I will explain what I mean. You cannot have friends unless you really know them. And there must be an algorithm, a way for you to prove that you know them. So, for example, if I want to become friends with Richard Grannon on Facebook, I must first certify that I know Richard Grannon, that I really know him, that I've met him, that I've shaken his hand, that I stole his wallet, which I regularly do. So I must have a real-life correlate. Now, how can I prove that I've met Richard Grannon? Richard Grannon would provide something, some information that only he and I know. And then the social medium will ask me, and if I confirm this information, then I can become friends with Richard Grannon. Why is this important? Because one of the main utterly poisonous features of social media is their unreality, their virtuality. The fact that they create an alternative universe, which is essentially, by any definition of psychology, psychotic, shared psychotic disorder. We must rid ourselves of the virtual, unrealistic aspect of social media. If I have 100 friends, of course, let me be in touch with them through Facebook. Why not? If I have 1,000 friends, let me be in touch. If I have 1,000 students, and I know all of them, like Jordan Peterson, let me be in touch with all of them. But I must prove that I know these people, and I'm in touch with them outside the confines of this utterly psychotic space.
The phones are smart enough and the apps are smart enough that they know if we're close together in proximity. So if I don't see you for a period of time, the app could actually say, you haven't seen Sam in 18 months, whatever they said it as. You've not seen each other face to face. And then you could have I'm not suggesting this, but you could have a sort of a fading process where you start to say, well, these 100 people, you haven't seen them.
Yes, you could have alerts. You could have alerts. You haven't seen your friend in 5 years, are you still friends? And so on and so forth, of course. But it must all be based on reality. The social media must be grounded in reality. That by itself, that alone will eliminate, I don't know, 80% of the toxicity.
Yeah.
So mandatory real-life verification. The only friends you have on Facebook, could have on Facebook, are the friends you really have, or at least acquaintances. Let's not be harsh. Someone you know, someone you've met, someone you've shared experiences with, someone you can access outside Facebook by calling him, by meeting him, by having a pint, and so on and so forth. So mandatory real life. The next thing I would make obligatory or mandatory if I were in the position to do so. And these are recommendations that I was invited to make to parliaments, in several parliaments in Europe. The latest one is Bulgaria. They are considering a social media law. And I made these recommendations to them. So possibly they will adopt some of them.
You said Bulgaria is very progressive with the social
Strangely,
media
Bulgaria, France, I mean, these so-called backwaters, allegedly backwaters in terms of technology, because they're not exactly Silicon Valley. They are much more progressive in the social engineering aspect of social media. They're much more aware of the pitfalls and the risks. and the potential, because social media is an instrument that is wonderful aspects and dimensions and so on. So one thing I would make obligatory is curation and moderation. Now, if you have 5,000 friends, which is the limit in Facebook for individual accounts, or unlimited number of friends if you have a page, then of course it's impossible to curate and to moderate. The number of messages is overwhelming. But if by virtue of your life, real life, the maximum number of friends you can have is 100, because who has more than 100 friends, then curation and moderation becomes absolutely possible. And I think curation should have two phases. All messages must be first curated and moderated by the recipient. There is no such thing as automatic posting. I mean, this should be utterly eliminated. So that if I receive a message with ISIS beheading a captive, I must first vet it as a user. I mean, I know you think it sounds insane, but actually, there's been a campaign of ISIS, and they have hacked into or leveraged thousands of accounts on Facebook and placed videos of decapitations and so on and so forth. Had there been obligatory curation and moderation, two-phase curation and moderation, first the user, and then a curation moderation center, for example, in Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, which would then have a second look and decide by community guidelines if this is permissible or not permissible. I believe the whole story of fake news, terrorism news, I mean, all this will vanish, absolutely vanish. In a minute we'll come to the business aspects. In a minute we'll come to this, because Facebook, similar, they would say, well, we cannot survive with 100 friends. I mean, we need eyeballs, we need to monetize. We'll come to that in a minute. But curation and moderation. I believe that if users will be forced to curate or moderate, because the majority of the feed will come from real friends and so on and so forth, actually what it will create is a community, in effect. It will have a communal effect, an effect of community. I think there will be much less loathe, much less averse. Users will be much less averse to moderating and curating, because I would be interested to see what your posts and so on. And I think it will create a much higher quality of feed, of content on Facebook. Plus, it will get rid of all the pernicious, criminal, dangerous content that is now. So this is another thing. Finally, and before I come to the issue of the business model, finally, I would make it obligatory. I would make storytelling obligatory. Now that sounds a bit on the crazy side. Today, anyone can pose pictures of peeling bananas. I hate this girl. She has 16.8 million users.
It's a real issue for you. I mean,
it's a real issue for me. I mean,
Banana Girl.
I talk about geopolitics, history, culture, and so on.
It's Banana Girl that upsets you.
And Banana Girl at the same time peels a banana and she gets 443,000 likes. I mean, it's humiliating. My entire life has been misdirected. I never paid attention to bananas. So, but there's no storytelling there. I think the algorithms of social media should be reconstructed so as to actually generate stories. Today you have an option to create a story. So you have stories in Instagram, Facebook, but that's an option. And most people misuse this option. They just take a series of random images and they upload them as a story. Some bullshit like this. But the algorithm can be extremely easily reconstructed to actually take even a series of totally random posts and to create a story. Actually, Facebook started with this. Facebook today offers you a summary of the year. So every year you get like a summary of the year. What have you been doing this year? So they show you a photo from that and a photo from, and suddenly it's a story. I so like these videos by Facebook that I download them and then upload them to my YouTube. They're wonderful because they remind me of things I've done during the year, people I've met, people I've talked to. So as Facebook is doing now every year, there's no problem whatsoever to do every hour or every day or every month. No problem. So I think social media should be reconstructed as storytelling platforms, narrative platforms. Today they are not. Today they are anecdotal platforms. Not even information, definitely not knowledge, but anecdotal platforms. We must transition from anecdote to storytelling. You could say why. Why is that so important? Because, again, starting with a very famous psychoanalyst, Bruno Bettelheim, we know that storytelling has a therapeutic effect. Actually, frankly, what we do in psychotherapy is we reconstruct the patient's narrative. We propose to the patient another story. The patient comes with one story and says, listen, let's take all your Facebook posts and let's make another story. And suddenly the patient is healed or feels better. Because storytelling is therapeutic. Now, when you look at Facebook, it's disjointed, it's chaotic, it's discontinuous. And in this sense, it's horrifying, in the sense that it creates what Sartre called it ennui. It creates angst, creates anxiety. If I were to give you 3 random, totally disjointed, disconnected facts, right now, this very second, you would react with anxiety, even there's absolutely no reason to react with anxiety. Well, I'm here, maybe there is, but I mean, generally speaking, if Richard were to offer you 3 disconnected facts, you would react with anxiety.
My brain would be compelled to try and make
Yeah, I mean, you will try to
sense.
make patterns. You will try to think, why did Richard do this?
Yeah.
I mean, what does it mean? It's ominous.
Yeah.
It's minacious.
Yeah.
Now imagine an avalanche of utterly disjointed, disconnected, discontinuous, discombobulated, utterly fantastic, sometimes not fantastic, avalanche of factoids, of anecdotes. Of course, we are in a constant state of anxiety. But now imagine we take all these things and we put them into a story. We love stories. We grow up on stories. Never mind if the stories are on television or on a book. Storytelling is the foundation of everything. This is actually, of all the recommendations I made, this is the third easiest. The easiest is usage meters. The second one is limiting with clocks. And the third easiest is this. Because Facebook is already doing this, actually. So these are the operational recommendations I have, the functional recommendations. And now we come to the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is greed. Social media were invented not by accident in the United States. Most of the technology of the internet has been invented outside the United States. People don't know that. Firewalls have been invented in Israel. Antivirus has been invented in Slovakia. I mean, most of everything you have on your laptop screen has not been invented in the United States. Even www, the World Wide Web, has been invented in Switzerland, in CERN. So most of it is not American. The only thing that is quintessentially, purely American is social media. It's absolutely the only thing. Why? Money. It's an expression, the reification of avarice. Nothing wrong with avarice. Nothing wrong with greed, especially if I'm the one who's getting the money. No. But one of the counter-arguments, including in the speech, in the testimony of Zuckerberg in front of Congress, is, listen guys, I mean, if I do all this, I will not survive. First of all, that is a lie. Maybe you will not be making $10 billion, so you'll be making $100 million. You know what? You'll be making $1 million. Of course you will survive. You will not survive, you'll not be a multi-billion-dollar company, but you'll survive. So it's not about survival. It's about increasing your profits via addiction and conditioning, as your own engineers have testified. Sean Phillips, others, multiple times. Yes. So you are using psychopathology to generate profits. Not nice. Not nice. Now, the business model of social media is very simple. We monopolize your attention, we use your data and the fact that you're glued to the screen, we package it, and we sell this to the advertisers. Of course, that means the real clients of social media are advertisers and not users. So, this is the business model. So, Facebook can say, if we implement all these are very worthy, if we implement all these, the number of times, the amount of eyeball time will, decreased by 90%. How can we survive? Well, they can survive by charging a fee. All social media should be compelled to move from monetizing to charging a fee. Now you could say, wait a minute, this will never ever work because people got used to free television, free internet, and they will rebel and there will be explosion. Actually, in all previous electronic media, this is exactly what happened. Television started as a free service. There were 3 networks in the United States, then there were 6 networks, and they were all free. And then someone came up with the idea, let's sell television. And that's what is known as cable TV. And today, cable TV is 7 times larger in terms of revenue than all the networks combined. So it's not true that if you transition to a fee structure, your industry will be destroyed. Actually, if you look at any type of industry, of electronic communication, starting with the telephone and coming to the internet and social media, they all started free. They all started free. I don't know if you know, first telephone exchanges, first telephone services were highly localized affairs with like 100 numbers, and they were free. And then they began to charge when they connected into regional hubs, and they began to charge. Radio was the same. I don't know, I mean, you're not old enough to remember, I mean, you're kids, but when radio first came on the scene, it was known as ham radio. When it first came on the scene, Marconi, and so on. It was utterly free. And then there was legislation that if you wanted to own a radio, you needed to pay a license fee. It became ham radio. And then if you wanted to own a radio set, you had to pay a license. And in most countries in the world today, to own a television set or to own a radio, you must pay a license fee. All electronic media started as free and moved to a fee structure. Increasingly, this is what's happening with print media. All print media started as advertising sponsored. I mean, the real cost of a newspaper is much higher than what you pay. The rest is subsidized by advertising. So they were all advertising based. But then they discovered that they actually can sell subscriptions online and so on. So today, the mainstream of income of the New York Times is from subscriptions online. I mean, the hell with advertisers. They don't even solicit advertising anymore. So Zuckerberg and his ilk, they are capitalizing on the fact that we have become an ahistorical society. Society with no institutional memory and no knowledge of history. They are capitalizing on this. The whole structure of social media and the internet is atemporal. There are no, I mean, there are like, there's a date when you uploaded your video and so on, but it creates a timeless space where it's very difficult. For example, if you go to websites, it's very difficult to tell which website came before which. It's a timeless space. Zuckerberg and his ilk are using this, abusing this, as he's abusing and they are abusing every other thing. He's abusing this. He goes to Congress and says, listen, what are you talking about? For any medium to survive, they must have advertising. They must have eyeballs. That is a lie. That is not true. There has not been a single medium ever which survived by selling advertising. They all started by selling advertising or by being free. They all ended up charging fees. All. Telephone, telegraph, radio, television, all. Print media, all. So it's not outlandish to suggest that social media reached the level of maturity in their history that now they must transition to a fee structure. The minute they transition to a fee structure, that's the end of the toxicity.
It would prevent frivolous use as well, wouldn't it? It would stop trolling or it would reduce
People will
trolling.
stop trolling. You will get rid, first of all, of a lot of fluff. People who are on social media just to post cakes and I don't know what. I mean, people who pay a fee would work with social media seriously for political ends, for social ends, for whatever. Additionally, you would be able to get rid of relative positioning, also known as likes. Likes is by far the most venomous aspect of social media, by far, because it creates competition not only against other people, how many likes did I get, how many likes did you get, but it creates competition against previous versions of yourself. How many likes did I get yesterday against how many likes did I get today? It's absolutely sick. You need that. You need that when you are advertising based, because likes create something called stickiness. In other words, you come back to the same post to see how many likes you receive. You come back once, they can charge the advertiser once. You come back 100 times, they can charge the advertiser 100 times. Simple. So likes were invented to create stickiness and conditioning and addiction. But you don't need that if you don't work with it. If advertisers are not your main source of income, you don't need that.
Yeah.
So you can get rid of the likes and the relative positioning and competition and the depression and the anxiety and the suicide. You can get rid and the bullying. All this can vanish. Finally, here's the irony. Media that transition, really finally, I give you my word, Richard, stop kicking me. Bloody hell. I mean, it's blue. Enough. Finally, we come to the irony, which is where the mind boggles. There is a history of well over 70 years that shows that once you transition from free to fee, advertisers, after some lag, actually flock in. Actually, your advertising revenue increases. Take the New York Times. The New York Times was about to die. I mean, it was an extreme eventually. They opened a portal, I mean, a fee-based thing behind the paywall. So they went behind the paywall and started to pay subscription to read the New York Times online. After they opened the paywall, there was a period of 2-3 years. The paywall became profitable. Now the New York Times is selling more advertising than ever before.
Why is that?
Because you get quality audience. The fee is a filter. You don't get stupid girls with bananas. Because stupid girls with bananas buy bananas.
Yeah.
Period.
I buy advertising space and I
If I'm sufficiently wealthy to pay a fee,
Yeah.
I'm also sufficiently wealthy to buy an iPad or to. So now the New York Times has the highest advertising revenue in its 168, I think, years of history.
Yeah.
A second example, and that's a company I was a consultant to, so I know that company intimately and very well. It's called the Encyclopedia Britannica. I've worked with them for 10 years as business consultant and so on. Encyclopedia Britannica stopped the print sets, I think 2006. And they moved all the content behind the paywall. And they were terrified. They said, wow, I mean, what's going to be here? Because for about 2-3 years, they were advertising based. Britannica for 3 years was free.
Right.
Was free and just advertising. Exactly Facebook, same model, like Facebook. And they also began to look like a bit like Facebook. They were kind of attracting you, conditioning you, this, that. With all kinds of quizzes and schmizzes and I don't know what. They became very, entertainment company. And then they said no. I mean, they recoiled. They said, what's happening to us? I mean, we're stopping this. We are like 1768. We were established in 1768. We have a tradition. We have to. So what they did, they sold the DVD and print rights to another company called Britannica India. And so now India is printing and producing the DVDs, and Britannica, United States, and all this move was orchestrated by a guy called Tom Panelas. Britannica, United States, moved behind a paywall, and they were terrified. They said, listen, we are getting rid of advertisers. People will never pay for Britannica. There's Wikipedia. I mean, why on earth would they pay for Britannica? Britannica is more profitable than ever today. More profitable than ever. It's not true that when you move to a fee structure, you destroy your business. Normally there is a period of adjustment until people decide that they want to pay for the service and so on. But after that period, if Zuckerberg bothered to look at things, at numbers, he would have realized that had he switched to a fee structure, he would have delivered quality audience with minimum levels of income to advertisers. He would have also a much different profile of advertisers. Today he has Russian hackers and six-rate businesses. Tomorrow he can have top quality brands and so on, because if I can afford to pay a fee, I can afford to buy products and services and so on. It's a filtering mechanism. It's exactly what happened in cable TV. Cable TV advertising revenue is greater than the advertising revenue of all other media combined. Print, Amazon, I mean, all other media combined. It's the greatest enormous generator of advertising revenue, although it's fee-based. So this is what I recommend.
These are good recommendations. I think it would be hard. There could be no reasonable opposition or argumentation to that.
None that I see.
Not on the basis of money or anything
None
else.
that I see.
Other than that, I guess there would be the momentum, you know, what it would take to actually turn the thing around.
Yeah.
That's it. That would be the only thing.
I actually think that social media executives got trapped in their own defensive positions, some of them fallacious, I mean openly fallacious, but they got trapped. And I'm like, how do I go back from this?
Yeah.
I told the whole world that I can't, how can I go back from this?
Yeah.
And also, it's uncharted territory.
Yeah.
For example, imagine Zuckerberg wants to get rid of the like. It's like very frightening. Don't forget that he's a young man. I mean, we keep forgetting, these are kids. They're young men. They started these businesses in their teens, or latest, 20, 21. They are young men with very limited experience. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but think about it. They're young men with very limited experience, and their businesses are what we call serendipitous businesses, businesses that happened by accident. Zuckerberg didn't sit in his dormitory and say, wait a minute, now I'm going to come up with a killer app that will... It just happened to him. It was as much of a shock as it was a shock to Trump that he became president. You know, he was not prepared. Zuckerberg and his generational group, the people who created social media, were not prepared for that success. They were utterly prepared for failure, but they were ill-prepared for success. And they are young, and they're frightened, and they're in panic, and they have a million advisors, but they don't know how to decide among these advisors. And they don't have a historical perspective, because their generation is truly ignorant and illiterate. By the way, every word I say, for the producer not to jump on me, every word I say is utterly backed by research. Generation Z is the most illiterate generation in the history of the United States. 45% of them find it difficult to read a bottle label, labels on bottles and labels of medicines. It's a serious problem. Zuckerberg and his generational group, they are not exactly Generation Z, but they're more or less Generation Z, Generation X, Generation Y. So these generations, these latest generations, their businesses were created despite themselves. It just dropped from the sky, and they were. So I think they're frozen. It's like exactly like CPTSD, you know, flight, fight, freeze. I think they chose the freeze because, like, what the hell? Do I really? There is something in psychology called the fraud syndrome. I don't know if you heard of it. People who experiences serendipitous, totally unexpected success develop the inner conviction that somehow they are defrauding the world. Somehow they are cheating the world. And that the only thing they are good at is hiding the fact that they are cheating the world. This is called the fraud syndrome. I think all social media executives, owners, suffer from the fraud syndrome. I think they all, Zuckerberg gets up in the middle of the night and says, how the hell did this happen to me? How did I become one of the world's richest people? I mean, what's going on here? I mean, and can I maintain this momentum for another year? I fully believe that he feels fraudulent. I can't prove it. I didn't have access to it, but I fully believe that he does. And you know what? To a very large extent, he should. Why should he? Because we don't know why social media work and succeed. And there's only one certainty. It was designed, for lack of a better word, maliciously. So, if you are an executive of a social media or something, or owner of social media, the only thing you know for sure is that at some point you took design decisions which should be seriously frowned upon. Seriously. Not to use much harsher words. And that's, you know, that it was your only contribution to the, you did nothing else. Everything came to you out of nowhere. The only thing you did do, once the avalanche started, you took big snowballs and threw them on people. I mean, the only interference you had, the only contribution you had, your only involvement was in a sliver of history of the social media where there were some design decisions, and those design decisions are immoral. That is a very excellent background to feel fraudulent.
Definitely.
Basically, from what you were just saying there, I wanted to talk about, ask you guys to discuss microfame. Microfame as in these people, these kids are getting an element of fame, which I've termed microfame. But also what you just said there, fraud syndrome, seems to be attached to that. These young people...
Sorry, the second part?
The fraud syndrome.
The fraud syndrome.
It seems to be attached to that. They have this microfame, so suddenly they're famous with these followers, these young people, but they feel like a fraud. They know it's not real. Can you two discuss that and what that would do to someone? Is that some sort of fetish split there?
So you're talking about a 17-year-old girl post pictures of herself eating bananas?
With bananas. 16.8 million.
With bananas?
I hate her.
Bananas.
I absolutely hate her. I mean, I have only two options. To marry her or to, I mean, no other way.
So what would that do to someone, having that fame, that microfame?
Sudden escalation of celebrity, microfame, where she would, 500,000 followers, something like that, you mean?
But knowing that it's a fraud as well.
Knowing that it's fraudulent. I would think that there would create massive anxiety, cognitive dissonance, because one part of her would be, as Sam has gone to lengths to distinguish between addiction and conditioning. She's conditioned to think that that is normal and something to be desired. But another part of her knows very well that what am I famous for? For eating bananas, for taking pictures of myself in a thong, or meaninglessness. That I don't, even people I think who've got seriously diminished IQ must know that they must on some level intuit they're offering very little of value. So I would imagine it would create, at the very least, anxiety and possibly really negative effects on the self-concept.
Okay. I would like to systematize what Richard said. Richard, stop kicking me. You know? I'd like to systematize what Richard said. First of all, I fully agree. When there is a discrepancy between input from the environment and how you perceive reality, when there is a discrepancy between real reality and your perception of reality, this usually creates severe anxiety and depression, by the way. It's one of the major sources of depression. So, but I think anxiety in this case would have at least two, maybe three tiers. The first one is the issue of value. Am I giving value? Here I would beg to differ a little with Richard, but only because he's kicking me. Otherwise, no. So I would like to differ a little with Richard. I think many of these users are not sure what is value. They have not been inculcated, they've not been brought up to realize the difference between value and not value. In other words, like Guy Debord said, there is a confusion between spectacle and real essence. So like they regard spectacle as value. So if I'm peeling bananas in very creative ways, that's a value. The spectacle is a value, you know. So I think many of them think they're actually giving value. But then there are two other tiers where I agree with Richard about the founds, the sources of anxiety, owing mostly to dissonances of various kinds, cognitive and other. The second tier is it's not real. So distinguish the two. I'm giving value, but the value I'm giving is an apparition, is ephemeral, is mist, is smoke and mirrors. So I'm giving value, but it's not real. Whenever there is a conflict, that's what we call reality test. Whenever there is a conflict between appearance and reality, this creates enormous anxiety. Actually, the strongest anxiety we know. The strongest anxiety we know is when we are disoriented by feedback from reality that runs contra to our theory of the world, or theory of mind. So, for example, I have a theory that the only thing of value in the world is education. Okay? I believe in education, I believe in teaching people, I believe in it. And then I open a channel, an Instagram channel, personal channel. And in this Instagram channel, I sing Russian songs. And suddenly I have 50 million followers and a million likes each time, and so, which I should try later. A million. Now, of course, it will be gratifying. And I would also maybe believe that I'm providing some kind of value, because I have a good voice and you don't want to fuck with the Russians, so it's good value. So, but on the second tier and second level, I would know it's not real. I mean, because I believe the only real thing is education, knowledge, and I know I'm not providing education, knowledge, or anything else. I would know it's not real, and that would create enormous anxiety in this one. Then there is a third tier, which is, in my view, becomes later the most critical. How sustainable is it? How long can I continue to peel bananas and attract 16.8 million? When will people get tired of me and my bananas? The sustainability of the act, of the spectacle, is a crucial factor, because social media users are very fickle and capricious, and they are nomads. We call them digital nomads. They gravitate, they emigrate, they are itinerant. Today you are Jordan Peterson with millions of followers. Tomorrow you're utterly forgotten. I mean, I can mention names of Jordan Petersons 5 years ago and 10 years ago that no one in this studio ever heard of. And they were Jordan Peterson. They were as big as Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson, for example, I'm sure he's asking myself, how long can this continue? I mean, let me capitalize on it as soon as I can, as fast as I can. And all these users are asking this sustainability question, which creates enormous angst, enormous anxiety. So these are the three levels of anxiety. But the answer is actually yes, anxiety, huge anxiety.
The image I got in my mind was of, trying to sustain a toppling tower, which it must always be, no matter how pretty you are, no matter how beautiful you are, however you're trying to get your likes or skilled at skateboarding, whatever the thing is, the spectacle, because it's all spectacle based, as Sam just said. Spectacle in and of itself is ephemeral, it's transitory, it can't last. So if I'm that young girl, I will experience massive amounts of status anxiety, and I'm going to have to keep going back and checking, and it must be obsessive. When you see the young with their phones, there is something nervous about the pulling out of the phone. It's compulsive, and it reminds me of when I used to smoke. I think I used to smoke predominantly in situations where I felt socially exposed, and I would put a cloud around my own head because I felt alone or isolated, or it was nervous. I was doing it with my fingers. The tapping with the phone is. I actually saw a girl do this with her nose the other day in Portugal. So lazy, she wanted to swipe, and I've never seen this before. It was beautiful. Like
it's Slavoj Žižek's daughter.
Yes, he loves it. He says, "I need purest ideology." So she was slumped in a shopping mall, and I walked past her. It was like a 3-second. I just looked, and she couldn't be bothered to lift her right hand to the phone. So she simply swiped with the nose, and then what? She moved on with her life. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Ideology at its purest. So
it's amazing. Why are you making a movie with social media? I mean, make a whole thing with Slavoj Žižek.
So that dabbing, dabbing obviously is what they call a dance move nowadays, which confuses it. But dabbing to me also was when I was involved in the drug culture, when I was in my early 20s, cocaine and speed. Dabbing was also taking drugs. If your high was coming down, you dab to bring yourself back up. This is a drug. Like you were saying to me the other day, it's a drug. And if my high comes down and I'm not anesthetized anymore, reality's coming in, at that moment, to use the proper psychoanalytic terminology, probably the superego gets activated. The inner critic, it says, you know, those followers you got today, you're not going to have them tomorrow. Phone comes out, check, must look and see what's going on.
Check and radicalize.
Yes.
Make a new post.
Yeah.
Even more extreme than yesterday's post. That doesn't work. I mean, make it more extreme. It pushes you to extreme behavior, radicalized behavior, and finally, ego-dystonic behavior, behavior that you're ashamed of, or frightened of, or wouldn't want your parents to see, or, you know. So it pushes you not to be you. This is a source of anxiety and depression, which, by the way, maybe it's the time to talk about the psychology.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So would you like to?
Yeah. So there are other elements to the psychology of how this plays out that we're going to have a look at. Part of it was we're going to look at some transactional analysis as it relates to this. So yeah, there are other psychological fields that we
I don't
can
know if
draw
I'll make
from.
use of it or not, but just to have it as a, you know. Because last time I neglected actually, because last time I didn't want to be too elitist, so I didn't want to name drop and everything. But now I would like to mention a few.
Yeah, but this one we want to move on from the second one. The first one was here's the issue. Now we really want you guys to help us
solutions.
understand
Yeah.
the issue, not just point it out.
Yeah. But I want to give some psychological background to why is it addictive and conditioned and so on and so forth, and then you can either make use of it or it's up to you. At least to have it as a. So first of all, one very important behavioral scientist, he focuses on economics, but he's still very important. His name is Dan Ariely. And one of the most famous experiments he has conducted is the following. He took a group of students and divided them to three. And he gave all of them a piece of paper where they had to identify repeated letters. So for example, GG, XX. So utterly meaningless task. Yeah? And for each piece of paper, they were paid, if I remember correctly, $1. So they had this stack, and they had to take the first one and GG, XX, XX. Oh. So there are three groups. The first group of students, and they had to hand the paper. So the first group of students went to hand the paper. When they handed the paper, the guy who received the paper looked up and said, "Wow, you did a wonderful job." Like. The second group of students, when they handed the paper, the guy took the paper and ignored them completely. Just put it aside. The third group of students, when they handed the paper, the guy took the paper and shredded it in front of them. I would have liked to have been this guy. Right. It's incalculable pleasure. So, but it's very fascinating because actually these are three modes of relating. One mode is you are being seen and you're being liked. The second mode is, well, I acknowledge your work, but you're not being seen. I don't know who you are. I mean, you are an anonymous paper processor, paper pusher. And the third one is actually aggressive. Your work is worthless, meaningless. I'm going to shred it. Here's what happened. Group 3 and Group 2, the shredded and the ignored, reached a certain point and stopped, even though they could have continued to mint money. I mean, there was like a stack. But they stopped. After some time, they simply stopped. They couldn't anymore. They left all of them. There was not one exception. All of them. Group 1 continued and continued and continued and continued and could not stop. And not for the money. Until actually they cut the experiment. So technically the results of the experiment is that Group 1 produced 35% more papers than Group 2 and Group 3. But that's only because they actually cut the experiment. They would have continued forever. We see here conditioning in action. The only difference between these three groups is that when they handed the paper, they received a like, exactly like Facebook. So this is a foundational study in the effects of attention on conditioned behavior. Now, there was a guy called Eric Berne, and Eric Berne wrote a book, Games People Play. And in this book he said, listen, we all have recognition hunger, hunger to be recognized. He also said that we have something called stimulus hunger. Never mind. For our purposes, he said there is something called recognition hunger. We are eager to be recognized. And then later on, he invented transactional analysis, which was a kind of psychotherapy. He said recognition hunger, and he said, this is such a fundamental force, Eric Berne said, such a fundamental force, that we will go to extremes to be recognized. And he called this process stroking. We will seek strokes. We will go to people and we will look them in the eye and we will say, do you see me? Do you recognize me? Do you know what I'm doing? Do you appreciate my work? He said that aggression will escalate until a stroke is established. That's Eric Berne.
So you force people to stroke you?
Yes, he said most strokes are forced. He said aggression, that's what he says, aggression will escalate until people stroke. So stroking is solicited, cajoled, coerced to some extent. He said luckily, most people stroke because, for example, I acknowledge you, I acknowledge Richard sometimes. So most people stroke without, but he said if they are denied stroking, their aggression will escalate. And on this basis, by the way, he created transactional analysis. And one of the main techniques in transactional analysis, I don't know how well you know the technique, one of the main techniques in transactional analysis is the patient sits, and you're the therapist, and the therapist strokes the patient. The therapist says, I see you. I recognize you. What do you do? Your work is important. So there's active process of stroking narcissistic knowledge that it is shocking to me that anyone can debate the psychology of social media. This is not newfangled thing that now we need to invent. I mean, this is so well known. Berne conducted a series of studies on games. And he's the authority. I mean, he was the world authority on games. How people play games. And he discovered that negative stroking, that people will seek positive stroking, but if they fail with positive stroking, and I based my work on narcissistic supply based on that actually. He said if they fail with positive stroking, they will revert to solicit negative stroking. And they will continue with whatever works. If what works is positive stroking, they will be conditioned. And if it is negative, they will be conditioned. And they cannot exit these frames. It's a critical issue.
Yeah.
Once they have been conditioned, negatively or positively, it's for life. Well, except intervention, therapy or whatever. Yeah? So he gave the example of a child. He said, a child would try to solicit positive stroking from his mother. But if she doesn't pay attention to him, he will begin to cry, and if this doesn't work, he will misbehave. He will become naughty, he will break things, and so on. And now, he said, if the mother gives him attention only when he breaks things and cries, this would be the established pattern of his interaction with his mother. And by the way, later a work by Jean Piaget and so on proved that, absolutely proved that. So why is this important? Because in social media, it is almost impossible to obtain positive stroking. I explained that in my previous interview, and it's part of Plugged In. The platforms are built to encourage competition, envy, aggression. These are not platforms where you can receive positive stroking. You can receive only negative stroking. What does it mean negative stroking? It means trolling, bullying, this, that. Or if you post something and you receive many likes and so on and so forth, the negative stroking will be self-generated. How? You will be competing against others, competing against yourself and so on. There is no positive stroking on Facebook. Even if I post something now and all my very good friends like it, the outcome is invariably negative stroking. Because, you know, only 80 liked it, yesterday 100 liked it, why only 80, Richard's post got 200. I mean, it's totally so. And that is Eric Berne. Eric Berne said that behavior also is modified and changes. I mean, the more strokes you get, the more you forget everything else. Berne said it in 1967. I mean, it's absolutely amazing that it's not, you know. He said, the more strokes you get, the more you get addicted, or he didn't use the word addicted, the more you kind of direct all your mental energy and everything to stroking. And you forget everything else. You forget intimacy, you forget relationships, you forget, I mean, stroking becomes absolutely the be-all and end-all of your life. And he said that, and he called it reinforced stroking. Finally, two more things. Maslow, Abraham Maslow, a very famous psychologist, later sociologist, made a pyramid of human needs. Mm-hmm. At the bottom there is food, shelter, and so on. And then, but the third rung of the pyramid is belonging and love. Maslow, what is not known, is that this pyramid, Maslow drew it, I think on a napkin or something. Maslow, seriously, he like drew it in one, casually. He drew it to explain his work. But his work is like, you know, each volume is like 900 pages. I don't know. And retards like me have read the work. So I read the work. And he explains what is belonging in love. And it sounds suspiciously like narcissistic supply, coupled with the algorithm of social media. What he means by belonging and love is actually ingratiating yourself with a group so that the group provides confirmation of your worth, of your, which is suspicious it sounds like a narcissistic supply, but he also says that the group has structured ways to communicate with you that you belong, that you are loved, and so on and so forth. And he details these structured ways, and when you read them, you say it looks like some psychologist advised Facebook how to construct, or Instagram, or how to construct to conform to Maslow's work. And now I'll mention the intellectual giant in all this list, and that is Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins had, what? I understand this guy.
You told me, sorry, just a quick thing. You told me to read Adler. You said you recommended Adler to me, and I read Tony Robbins first. I read through Adler, and Tony Robbins has ripped him off to the core. Not just NLP.
Do not broadcast.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's live.
The guy can sue your ass.
Shit. It's
Yeah.
live. I heard someone else say, and I said, "Listen, don't talk about my man Tony like that, or you'll get a bit of this."
Tony's absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful,
Tony is,
good man.
I mean, it goes like that. Freud, what is the other
Jung.
guy's name? Jung and Tony Robbins.
Juncker.
Junge and Tony Robbins. But every cloud has a silver Robbins, and Tony Robbins came with something that he called the 6 human needs. And within the 6 human needs, he has two of these needs are significance, feeling significant, and love connection, what he calls love connection. And he, to his credit, and I'm serious now completely, I mean, if a guy deserves credit, he deserves credit. To his credit, as far as I know, he's among the first, if not the first, to have put together that love and connection actually generates significance. But of course, being Tony Robbins, what he means by love and connection is actually much closer to the banana peeling girl in Instagram. What he means love and connection is adulation, admiration, popularity. Popularity, actually. Actually, openly says it. You need to be popular. I mean, popularity, this is for him love connection. He said, but this, he said, yields significance. He says, you cannot feel significant. And also for him, significance means how you influence the world, how you influence others. What he's saying essentially, if you don't become popular, you cannot influence others, essentially. But he describes it in a way that eerily resonates of the likes of Instagram. So if I had to compile a list of works to read, someone like Tony Robbins epitomizes, reifies the new ethos, which also is epitomized and reified in social media. He's a creature of the age. He's a creature of the, and a creator of the age. Not only a creature, but a creator. So one ignores people like Tony Robbins and now Jordan Peterson at your own peril. I mean, you must have a deep look at them. So this is what I want to say to add about psychology. Now, use it, don't use it, it's up to you, but have it at least.
Whilst we're in the psychology theory area, could you explain to people who have no psychology background what the difference between conditioning and addiction is? Because there's a layman's term, conditioning, and I think people are misunderstanding that you're using it in the psychological realm, that, especially as it relates to positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, you did a very good job of that. I saw a video of yours where you was it from? I don't remember. It was a video, but I don't remember what type of video, where you actually explained the difference between addiction and conditioning. So it was not bad at all. But okay, the difference between addiction and conditioning is the following. Conditioning is much more biological, much more neurological. It's much more grounded in neural pathways, brain neuroplasticity, reactivity, etc., etc., etc. That's one element. The second element, conditioning connects to utterly unrelated behaviors, while addiction connects to utterly related behaviors. That's a crucial difference. In addiction, you connect two related behaviors. You consume drugs, you feel good. They are cause and effect. Not so in conditioning. In conditioning, you ring a bell, the dog salivates. There's no connection between these two. So conditioning is, and that's exactly what happens in actually the likes of Facebook, or I mean in Facebook, in Instagram, where there are likes, because the likes create conditioning. If you look at a like objectively, what is a like? It's nothing. But it creates a sense of well-being or a sense of depression, or so it affects mood. Now we test whether it's addiction or conditioning via a tool called mood congruence. So if, for example, I'm depressed and I get likes and I become more depressed, that might be a casual connection, because I'm anyhow depressed, maybe more depressed. It's like there is some line. But for example, if I'm depressed and then I get likes and I suddenly become euphoric or elated, that would be conditioning. Because theoretically, there's no possibility for likes to affect, or shouldn't be a possibility for likes to affect this way. So how do they affect? How conditioning is created? By what we call meta-narrative. The dog salivates because he has a story in his head. In the past, when I heard the bell, I received food. That's the story the dog has, if he's Jewish. So, intelligent dog. So there's...
An argumentative.
How are you going to edit all this? It's a disaster.
It's live. We're doing
It's a disaster waiting to happen. How are you going to edit all this? So, but there's a story behind it. And there must be a narrative connecting these apparently totally unrelated behaviors or moods or affect or cognitions even, thoughts. So the narrative in Facebook, for example, likes signifies love, or likes signifies popularity, or likes signify influence. I mean, that's the meta-narrative. But of course, it's utter nonsense. The thing in conditioning, as opposed to addiction, is that conditioning is irrational. The narratives are nonsensical. While in addiction is actually a rational activity, because really, if I take drugs, I feel much better. It's a fact. That's why the opioid crisis exploded, because it works. It's totally rational. But if I get likes, I'm more influential, or if I get likes, I'm more loved or more liked. That's an irrational narrative, because it cannot be substantiated. First of all, many of the likes, you don't know who they are. I mean, it's totally a nonsensical narrative. So, now, conditioning both behaviors are what we call compulsive behaviors, in the sense that you cannot stop them. But conditioning is only compulsive. Let me explain it this way. No, sorry. Cut that. Both behaviors, addiction and conditioning, are compulsive behaviors in the sense that the behaviors cannot be stopped by a sheer exertion of will. But there are important cognitive differences between cognition and addiction. In addiction, the activities are usually structured, they are non-chaotic, they are structured, they are goal-oriented, and they provide some kind of meaningful meaning. They provide some meaning. Conditioning, on the other hand, is utterly chaotic. It's non-structured. And the meaning is the conditioning itself. There's no external meaning. So, to make it more clear, if I'm a drug user, I'm a junkie, so it provides me, first of all, with structure. It structures my life. I have to get up in the morning, steal money from mom, from mother, use it to buy drugs, inject the drugs. So it provides me with structure. It also provides me with meaning. The meaning of my life is to obtain to feel good. I mean, the aim is to feel good, so I'm taking drugs, or whatever it is. But there's some meaning there. It's meta meaning. And it's also very structured. Very structured in the sense that I have a pusher, identifiable pusher, I will go to the pusher, I know when to go to the pusher, I know how to talk to the pusher. I mean, it's totally structured activity. Not very different, for example, from going to university and studying. No. They are all purposeful. We call them directional. They're all directional activities. Not so conditioning. Conditioning is utterly chaotic. That's why you see people with smartphones, you know, it's not like they say, well, I'm going to check the smartphone on the 18th minute of every hour. That would be directional, structured activity. Conditioning is not. It's chaotic. And it's compulsive. And it leads nowhere. And it has no meaning. There's not in that. So that's why you see people, I mean, taking the smartphone every 2 minutes to check how many likes and how many not likes. You can see the behavior is chaotic. What did Richard just describe with these girls and this? I mean, the behavior is chaotic, totally chaotic. And these are critical differences between conditioning and addiction. That's why addiction is in principle curable. Well, in principle, curable. But not so conditioning. Conditioning is, has a notoriety of being almost impossible to cure. Almost impossible. Because conditioning is so embedded in the brain, and so there's no structure, no predictability, no possibility to intervene. There's nothing you can do there. In addiction, you can sit with a person, tell him, listen, you can feel well, you can feel better in many ways. I mean, there's only one way. Let's see, let's do, let's this, let's that. There's nothing you can do in conditioning. Nothing you can do. What will you tell this girl who is checking her account 50 times a minute? What can you tell her? Listen, don't check it 50 times, check it 10 times. I mean, why? She would ask you why. Why should I check it only 10 times?
You almost have to bypass, for conditioning, you have to bypass the personality and the ego and go straight to training them like an animal.
Yes.
So where Tony Robbins did a good job, and I'll give him credit, is when he was banned from using the term NLP, back in 1991 he came out with a system called NLP is Neuro-Linguistic Programming. He did Neural Associative Conditioning, and it was actually physiologically superior. It was more advanced. It never caught on, but it was more factual, and it's based on these principles exactly. So his system for personal development was about conditioning. So he would condition you for success, he'd condition you for making money, for whatever it is. With the social media, with the tech, when they're pulling out the smartphones, the reinforcement is only ever intermittent, which adds into the chaos that Sam was talking about. I don't know whether I'm going to get my hit this time. I'm pulling it out because the dealer might be there, but he might not. Yes. He might not be showing up, and I might need to do it. Maybe it's the 5th one. Shit, that's 6 times I've looked and I didn't get my hit. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. You'll get your hit, but you've got to keep going, kid. You've got to keep. And the brain, the neural pathway is just being grooved in, like, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. And that's where you can't do like CBT, we can't chat about childhood trauma, do you feel lonely? You've got to kind of bypass the conscious mind completely, because it's now biologically, in the same, I'm not saying biologically, in the same way that like I would reach for cigarettes in this stupid unconscious way, that you can say, you feel lonely. There's the beginning of it. You will do this so that you feel X, Y, Z. That's an addictive behavior. This is there's no real logical to it, so it's hard to tackle. The other thing I just wanted to quickly add on this issue of the negative hits, the negative stroking, you'll see that in schools amongst these teenagers with bullying. There are kids, I remember observing it the first time in boarding school, and I was like, there's kids here who are looking to be bullied. I'm not saying like it's some victim mentality. I mean, literally, they would aggravate other children to receive. Some attention is better than nothing. We do have this phenomena online. They've called it digital self-harm. I looked it up, the first mention of it is, I think, 2010. I don't know who the researcher was who came up with it, but digital self-harm is a thing. So will you see...
Carl Newport.
Was that Carl Newport, was it?
Carl Newport.
So you see somebody pull out their phone, we can't just go, oh, this person's looking for a hit of narcissistic supply to feel good. They might be looking for actually somebody to abuse them. And we know this because there are sites set up where kids just post a picture of their face and then say, roast me. Other people tell me how ugly and stupid I am. Tell me about other pointless people I look like. Tell me, insult me as much as you can. Give me pain, but give me recognition. Give me something. That's where it gets very, very dark.
You
Richard,
mentioned earlier, sorry,
Sorry.
just when you're getting back to that, you were saying there, it's the difference between conditioning and addiction. Conditioning seems to have no story to it. It's not going anywhere. There's no end to the story.
True.
Do you think what you were talking about earlier, bringing storytelling back into social media, will turn it back from a conditioning tool to an addictive tool? Therefore, it'll be easier to treat.
Yes, excellent observation, absolutely. I think we should convert the conditioning to addiction. First of all, there is, as Amanda Lenhart discovered in her most recent, these studies were published a few months ago, there is an enormous group of teenagers, 58% of teenagers who are dying to disconnect from social media. And they're trying again and again and again. They keep coming. So we can't go from conditioning to healing. This is a lost case. That's why the experiment you made in Plugged In is actually very interesting, because conditioning cannot be solved by taking away the devices or signing off social media. That's good for addiction, maybe. So when you go to a rehab for drugs, they strictly inhibit or restrict your access to drugs. They restrict your access to previous friends from the street. They restrict your access to drugs. So restricting your access to drug is critical in addiction. That's true. But restricting your access to a drug of conditioning will have zero impact. I mean, it will not work. It's not the way to heal. You're absolutely right that we must first convert conditioning to addiction. It's the only hope of healing. So while addiction requires a two-step process, addiction rehab, actually here we need conditioning addiction rehab. To convert social media from conditioning to, we need storytelling, we need community, because community support is critical in addiction, in curing addiction. So we need to create a community, forced to create a community, for example, by having friends only friends who you really know. All these measures, actually, precisely what you just said, to create a holding environment, a community, meaning, to introduce meaning into the whole mess, which is, because meaning negates conditioning, negates. I mean, these dogs were dogs, so we couldn't test this hypothesis. But, for example, we have studies of Holocaust victims. Holocaust was a form of mass conditioning, not addiction, of course. No one was addicted to Auschwitz. Yeah? But it was a form of mass conditioning. The first person who actually identified this was Viktor Frankl. And what was Frankl's solution? Frankl said the only way to fight such conditioning is meaning. And he came up with logotherapy, therapy via meaning. So we must actually implement a form of logotherapy. We must take this girl who is peeling bananas, I hate her, and peeling bananas and has 16.8 million followers. We must take this girl and we must convert her, we must move her from a totally arbitrary, chaotic, meaningless environment where she keeps peeling bananas, bananas, bananas. She keeps peeling, getting likes, getting bananas, peeling, like. I'm doing this on purpose. It's precisely the mindset of social media users. So we must take this girl and we must introduce some meaning into her life. The meaning can start with the bananas. I mean, you never stray too far from the conditioning because of what Richard mentioned. There's an issue of reinforcement. Reinforcement is a term borrowed from behaviorism, Skinner and the likes. And today it fell a bit out of favor. But I agree with Richard, it's totally pertinent. There is, in social media, one of the worst features is that you are captive to total uncertainty. Your well-being, your mood, your ability to function, your very cognitive processes, everything is hostage to utter, unmitigated uncertainty. Will I get likes? Will I not get likes? Will I be ignored? So when outcomes are not certain, this is what Richard said, intermittent reinforcement. Now, intermittent reinforcement is the foundation of bullying, foundation of abuse. It's the foundational mechanism of these things. And foundations of something called trauma bonding. I'm surprised that Richard did not mention it, but I'm delighted. Absolutely delighted. Because now I can mention it. I think the relationship between users and social media platforms is trauma bonding. That's my view. Now, trauma bonding has powerful elements of conditioning, which is exactly why it's almost impossible to break. I mean, any therapist will tell you that any abusive relationship can be broken easily. Listen to me, easily. Except trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is unbreakable. I mean, never mind what you do. The woman has PhD in engineering, physics, archaeology, history, and nothing. She could be as intelligent, as beautiful, as breathtaking, as rich as you want. But she has trauma bonding with her abusive partner, and you can forget about it. I mean, it's finished. She will not leave him. Why? This has nothing to do with relationship. It's conditioning. He conditions her by approach avoidance, giving withholding, berating complimenting, loving hating. It's a process of conditioning. It's exactly like the dog. There is a bell. You salivate. You don't salivate. So when we try to break trauma bonding, now we're talking therapeutic practice. It's precisely what we do. We take, for example, the woman, because most cases it's a woman that trauma bonds with the man. We take the woman and we offer her alternative narrative. We create meaning, we inject meaning into this utterly chaotic, insane process because she can never predict when her abusive partner will do anything. It's totally unpredictable, it's totally capricious, it's like likes. She doesn't know if she will get 50 likes, no likes, or 3 slaps. I mean, nothing. So you take this situation and you imbue it with meaning. The minute you imbue it with meaning, the trauma bonding is finished. There's another phase. Now she's addicted to him. That's another phase. She says, I cannot leave him, he's like a child, he needs me. Okay, that's addiction. That's it, that's easier. If you succeed in the narrative phase, where you introduce a narrative and the narrative is accepted by the victim, because the victims, users of social media are victims. If you succeed in that, you're halfway through. Unfortunately, the success rate is not high. I don't know about social media, because trauma bonding in a relationship is bad enough. Social media is a seriously bad form of condition, because it's much more primitive. The more complex the interaction, the more difficult it is to condition. So in a relationship, you have men, you have a woman, you have children, you have work, you have history. It's a very complex environment. For the abuser to trauma condition or trauma bond with the victim, it takes a lot of work, a lot of imagination, gaslighting, this, that. I mean, it's not easy. And there maybe the chances for success are, but the more primitive the conditioning, the more impossible it is to break. Because when the conditioning is very complex and built on multiple factors, you can dismantle, break some of these factors, reverse some of them, offer alternatives to some of them, you can do something. But what if the conditioning is likes? What do you do then? What if the conditioning is bell, saliva, bell, saliva? What do you do then? You take the bell, you take saliva, you take the dog. What the hell do you do? It's a problem. Conditioning, social media are so primitive. So they appeal to the reptilian part of our brain, if you wish. I mean, they're very primitive. And because they're primitive, they are, in my view, omnipotent. Their power is unlimited. And you see that. You see their power is unlimited. Now, they're beginning to capture new age groups, which I, by the way, fully predicted. I said the next victims are old people. Old people. Next victims are old. Remember my words, in 5 years. Next victims are old people. Suicide rates among old people will go up by 50%, 100%, I think even more than teenagers, because old people are much more vulnerable. Suicide rates will go dramatically, will explode among old people, because they are becoming addicted to social media. So they finish with one population group, then moving on to the next population group. This is uncanny. Uncanny. I mean, if you had a drug like this, or like Richard said, I mean, it's insane that this is not regulated, at least regulated, not banned, regulated, something. It's simply, not to mention the fact that if you want to buy a gun, there is background check. What do you think, what's the reason for all these nutcases who shoot up 50 people in New Zealand? And they're all using social media. So people say, listen, what is social media? The main act was shooting people in the mosque. Social media was incidental. No. The main act was streaming the murder on social media. The mosque was incidental. This is what people don't understand. It's a spectacle. It's a production. It's a theater production. But why? Because there are no background checks. This nutcase was able to access social media totally freely. Had he wanted to buy a gun, there would have been a 7-day period where he would be like, mentally ill, not mentally ill, I use some Vaknin. I mean, not anyone can buy a gun. But anyone can use social media. Now, do you think social media is less potent weapon than a gun? ISIS don't think so. ISIS dedicated 70% of their budget to social media. And they know a thing or two about killing people. Or 3. Social media is a much more potent weapon than any gun, tank, or combination of guns and tanks. Putin quakes in his boots. It's not NATO that frightens him. It's social bloody media. He's dedicated in the last 2 years an inordinate amount of time to legislate against social media. He banned VPNs. He banned for a while Google, Amazon, and YouTube. I mean, I think he's preoccupied with this social. China, Saudi Arabia, you name it. I mean, these people know a thing or two about conditioning, repression, abuse, killing. I mean, and what are they worried about? Not so much about, I mean, ISIS dedicated about 10% for weapon purchases, 70% to social media. This should tell us something.
Can I ask then, with that in mind, making films like this, talking like this, and putting this information out there, we seem to be storytelling, telling the story of social media. If that on a whole, will that give an context to social media that gives an ending? So people won't feel so lost in social media because they can see what's happening, therefore the story is becoming clearer. Films like this, discussions like this that you guys are having, what is your take on that? Are we telling the story of social media, therefore making it less of a conditioning tool?
If you can name it, you can tame it, which is a cheap aphorism, but it tends to be true. Like if something is dwelling in the unconscious and we can't see it and we don't know how to define it, then it will still have power. But if you can actually go, look, this is what's happening, sometimes in coaching, there's little more than that I do. They tell me their story and I retell it back to them with a few changes and they go, oh, yeah, I didn't think of that. And there's something in that. It seems to affect our ability to create boundaries, and overcoming any traumatic event needs to involve the re-establishment of a new story, changing of the map of reality in order to accommodate it. So yeah, I think there's a possibility that just through retelling the story of social media, some people will have a light switch on and withdraw from it. Absolutely, it's possible.
No, first of all, you see it. I mean, people are writing to us. I signed off Facebook. I closed my Facebook account. But what we're doing is what I call iconoclastic labeling. So we're simply taking a phenomena, we label it, so we give people handles, we give some handle. And then we break the idols. We're iconoclasts. We break the idols. And that's very useful. But of course, Abraham did this. Abraham's father was a manufacturer of statues of idols. And Abraham took a big stick and broke all the idols. But that was not enough. He had to invent monotheism. No, it's not enough to destroy, which is essentially what we're doing. It's important. But there must be an alternative provided. And unfortunately, the alternative must be on a case-by-case, individual level. You can't offer a meta-narrative that would fit 65-year-old, 60-year-old, banana peelers, Sam Vaknin. I mean, you must go essentially case-by-case, or at least group by group. And the slicing must be extremely, white women in the East Coast with this. I mean, it must be very finely cut, finely sliced. So it's a lot of work. The damage is incalculable in 10 years. In 10 years, I mean, it's been only 10 years now. I mean, 13 years. The damage, 2004, Facebook officially started, but actually 2006 it became an open platform. We're talking about maximum 15 years. Damage is utterly incalculable in human lives, in many other respects. So I'm not optimistic that just being evangelists, spreading the good word, the good news. I don't think it will work. I think it's very important to create awareness to do the work. So it's an indispensable first step. Iconoclastic labeling. More or less is what I did with narcissism. When I started with narcissism, there was no language. So I invented the language. Narcissistic supply, this, that. So people then had words. Words create consciousness. Consciousness is formed by words, not the other way. Once you have words, you say, oh, wait a minute, he's a narcissist. Or, oh, is this narcissistic supply? Or this somatic? So it's the same here. We are giving people a vocabulary. We're labeling for them. And we are breaking all kinds of taboos. To the credit of films like Plugged In, and hopefully what you'll be doing now, these are taboo-breaking films. This is not something you will see on CNN and that takes courage. I gave an interview to TRT World, which is a serious television station, it's not small. They were terrified. They were panic-stricken, and they refused to broadcast the interview. That's how much taboo there is. And I don't think Facebook picked up the phone and told them don't.
It was only discussing the things we've been discussing tonight.
Listen, I have been mild, moderate, cowed, tamed, domesticated, under the table, and totally not some Vaknin. Trust me, because I mean, listen, there are some studies by Twenge that there might be some effects, but even that was considered too sacrilegious, too blasphemous. So they did not broadcast, and the people involved with the interview were ashamed. I mean, they felt ashamed, simply.
Just for saying there might be something possibly maybe wrong with social media.
Trust me, might be something possibly maybe. That was because listen, I'm very experienced with I'll give interviews to CNN and so on. So I know how to, I can't talk on CNN as I'm talking here. That's why I am working with you, because here I can talk. No one can talk in mainstream media and because it's taboo. Why is it taboo? Maybe $100 million in lobbying fees in last year by the industry may have something to do with it, could be. Or the fact that Google is one of the biggest advertisers on earth could also have maybe something to do with it. But the fact is you can't. And here I'm giving a case. I gave an interview. By the way, luckily, part of the interview was captured. It's available on my Instagram. I mean, have a look. Tell me if there's something, outlandish there. Yeah. No, people are terrified. It's an economic power. People are terrified. Do you know the people are telling me, listen, you'll be killed? I mean, you're crazy. You and Richard, they will kill you. Of course, that's paranoia. No one will kill us. But it's indicative of state of mind of people. I mean, like, these are juggernauts. They took over. I mean, we live in Facebook world, and they will kill you. Don't do this. They will kill you. So that's the situation. but it's important work what you do. Important work. It's, this needs to be said, and I think we're saying important things, taboo breaking things.
You can strike deep with interviews like this and the storytelling like this. If I can put the idea into the mind of a mother with teenage kids, that when her daughter is pulling out her phone with a shaking hand, with what is clearly anticipatory anxiety, that mirrors the behavior of somebody who's being abused. When they hear the lock in the door open, they don't know who's coming through. Will he be nice this time? Maybe. Will he be nasty this time? Maybe. The lock's turning in the door and you're about to find out. It's like Schrodinger's cat in that moment. Alive, dead, we'll see when you open the box. That's a huge adrenaline spike for a child to go through. To see not even an external person would be traumatic enough, but some faceless external thing is going to say, yeah, you're a good object today, or no, you're a piece of shit today. And it's catastrophic when it's a no. It's not, we don't brush it off and just go, oh, never mind, I'm going to play tennis later, I'm going to hang out with my mates. It's everything to them. And the locus of control of their emotional state is totally externalized by this thing. So that anxiety, that idea is a pretty gory idea, but if I put that in the head of parents and they say, my God, that's what my teenage children are doing, and that's what they're going through, they might be more motivated to take it a little bit more seriously. And I actually say, listen, we need to moderate this to an extent, maybe.
Richard is talking about triggers. Triggering. Social media triggers. Triggers by comparison. Triggers by what we call relative positioning. That's a technical term. Social media triggers by relative positioning. And the leveraging of negative emotions, like envy, like this. But it's triggering, and it's abusive, and that's why I'm saying they're victims. And that's why I'm saying this is trauma bonding. That's very lucky, because we have all the tools to cope with trauma bonding. I mean, luckily, we have like 100 years of, so if we just shift the narrative, just shift how we see social media, we know how to help. But this is the core problem. People refuse at this stage, beginning to, but still refuse, to see what is social media. I mean, if you take 100 people in the street and you ask if social media is a drug, I think 95 would say no. You know, if you ask, do you think you are being abused by social media? No, why are you abused? Why am I being abused? On the contrary, I'm using social media, I'm connecting with friends, getting news, that's all. It's still, the social media propaganda is still working extremely well, and the image building, and it's still working very well. The overall attitude to social media is, if it affects you badly, it's your fault. Social media encourages alloplastic defense, in the sense that, listen, it's never the social media, it's never the instrument, it's how you use the instrument. Never mind, the instrument is built to force you to use it in only one specific way. That's the core. That's the message. Because people make the following mistake. They say, listen, social media is like a knife. I can use a knife to cut bread, or I can use a knife to kill someone. If I misuse or abuse social media, that's a problem. It's my problem. I'm guilty. I'm responsible. I'm to blame. Yes, but what if you had a knife that refused to cut bread and forced your hand via some electrical current to stab people? I mean, you couldn't even control it. The minute you took it, it took over and stabbed people. That's the correct analogy. And now you can say, listen, I like to stab people. I don't like to stab people. But the correct analogy is not an innocent instrument that has a multiplicity of possibilities to be used, and people abuse it. Poor social media. The correct analogy is a pernicious mind control brainwashing tool.
So, to someone who's watching this or listening to this, to put it in a very, very simple term, it would be like the ring from Lord of the Rings. The ring from Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose to the extent that the intent of that was to bind people, to control them, and to establish like a totalitarian state. Yeah, kind of. As Sam says, I don't think that was the intent from the outset. I think it's the way things go. I mean, I blame capitalism.
Yeah, money.
It's money. So there's only one way to win the game of capitalism, and it's the bottom line, at the profit and loss, the sheet that you look at. How much money are we making? Not as much as last year. We need more eyeballs on screen. What generates eyeballs on screen? Arguments, jealousy, political turmoil, horrible articles.
Comparisons with others.
Comparison with others, jealousy, envy. It's an exploitation of human vulnerability. It's a very definite, very calculated, explicit exploitation of human psychology.
Very true.
No doubt whatsoever. So people who keep saying this ridiculous, oh, it's just how you use it. Would you deliberately put your consciousness in a space that has been designed to alter the way you feel, to generate, as we said in the first interview, to generate negative emotion? Guaranteed that's what they're doing to keep you on the screen because of stickiness. Then you will look at the thread for longer. Of course you do. It's a trick. You're not looking at the article. You're writing your shitty post back to the person who sent a shitty post to you, and the screen goes, well, they've been there for 17 minutes, Mr. Advertiser. That's a long time, isn't it? And they go, yeah, great, I'll pay whatever the ridiculous fee is you're going to charge me per click on Facebook. That's what all of this has become about. So the idea that it's some pH-neutral environment, that's totally infantile.
Exactly. It's not a publishing platform. I mean, we must make a distinction between publishing platform and behavior conditioning platform. This is not a publishing platform. A blog is a publishing platform. That's a publishing platform. You have platforms like WordPress and so on. Some part of it is fee-based, some part of it is advertising-based, but it is utterly neutral platform. So there you go. By the way, very successful platform. Hundreds of millions of dollars, I mean, not small. There you go. You post your content. You can communicate this, that. It's a neutral, I call it background platform. It's a background platform. Facebook is intrusive. Instagram is aggressive. This is not a neutral platform. The minute you post, you are flooded with offers, advertising, news, likes. You are alerted to the likes. By the way, did you ever stop to ask yourself, why on earth are you alerted to the likes? They send you alerts. You received a like, you received a like. This liked you, this didn't like you. Why? There are so many features on Facebook that force you to return to the platform via alerts. Facebook has 40 different types of alerts. You can opt out of all of them. Extremely very true. I don't know how many people can do this. I mean, people are not computer savvy. I mean, we think they are, they're not. No, clicks. So Facebook keeps sending you messages. You receive dislike, dislike. This guy commented, and they send you the comment, and the comment is incendiary. And
it's like some sneaky friend who wants to get you into a fight.
Yes, exactly.
Do you know what they?
Do you know what Richard said about it?
Check it out. They're trying to generate drama.
Yeah.
They're like little drama queens, and it's an aggravating system. It's blatantly an aggravating system. I switch it off, and then I have to turn it on because somebody sent me a message about something, some work or whatever. I have to go back in. Every time I go back into Facebook Messenger, it says, "Can we add your contacts? Can we send you notifications?" And I say, "No." "Are you sure we can't have your contacts?" "No, you definitely can't." "Can we send you notifications?" "I just told you no. I'm not making this up. They asked you 5 fucking times." Like, no. Let me read my message and let me leave. "Why do you want to leave? Is it something we did? Is it something we said?" You have to go through this form, which now I know exactly. I've done it that many times. You just click here. You just fill out the thing, A, D, C, D, F, G, blah, 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 with garbage, and then just click out. But it's really, they cannot claim that they're not trying to coerce people.
It's a push system. It's a push notification system. We distinguish in internet between push and pull systems. It's not a system where you volunteer into a process, you opt in. It's not an opt-in process, it's an opt-out process. It's forced on you unless you opt out. And this is called a push. But they are pushy in the sense that, for example, they would invade your PC when you're actually working on a smartphone or vice versa. They're ubiquitous, all-pervasive, and they don't let you breathe. They're hounds. They're after you. I mean, seriously. They don't let you breathe. I mean, I turned off completely. I mean, I couldn't anymore. I was like, my screen was exploding. This guy liked, didn't like. It's like, there was a period that they were comparing likes, saying, I mean, Zoran liked you 49 times this month. Or in total, by the way, I can tell you, last week I received, in total your page received 6,008 likes. I have a page on in total, your page received 6,008 likes. Why do you need to know that? And would you like to compare yourself to similar pages or? It's deliberate. It's deliberate, it's calculated, it's well informed as far as psychopathology, not psychology, psychopathology. It's not a game. It's not a game anymore. It needs to be tackled. The sooner the better.
We've got time for another couple of questions, and then we should probably wrap.
We'll continue tomorrow. Huh?
Yeah, we're doing more tomorrow. Yeah. We don't need to continue. If
We
you're-
can
if you're
continue
happy with
tomorrow,
it, we can
Richard, if you
continue
want.
tomorrow. Yeah. I think we gave a lot there.
Yeah.
Loads, plenty. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you, Sam, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel, for kicking me.
And we're actually doing interviews all day tomorrow with Richard for the sequel to Plugged In. If you want to know more about that, you can go to Richard's Facebook page, which is Plugged In Documentary. Plugged In Documentary, to be updated there. And I will probably do a YouTube live video as we're going around Liverpool and shooting different things at some point. So I'll be speaking to you tomorrow afternoon. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.